Mm. Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Herman Gomez, and I am the Director of TESOL Education and Training Centers for World Learning. And I work for World Learning here at the headquarters in Washington, D.C. So I said good morning, but it's actually good evening to you. And I hope that you're enjoying your evening and the conference. And in this conference, we will talk about online learning programs, but we're going to focus on a three-layer approach. And for me, it's really a great honor to be here. As I have mentioned to some of you, I have had the chance to visit Myanmar many times, having had a chance to do some work in Yangon and also in Mandalay. And it's a really wonderful country. There are a lot of great teachers, amazing teachers. So I want to welcome you today to this session. Um, a little bit about World Learning. World Learning is an international nonprofit organization, and we work with in education and exchange with about 92 programs in education around the world. And we basically have an alumni network of about 90,000 people. Our work around the world as a nonprofit includes exchanges, global education, and STEM education. We work also with higher education institutions and institutional strengthening. We also have programs in youth workforce and entrepreneurship, civic engagement, and of course, TESOL, which includes a lot of teacher training, curriculum development, and working with universities, schools, and ministries of education. As I mentioned, World Learning is the organization which is based here in Washington, D.C., but we also have the School for International Training, SIT, which is a graduate institute that offers master's degrees and also graduate certificates. One of them in teaching of English to speakers of other languages, TESOL. I have had the great pleasure of working in Myanmar because World Learning is the organization that manages the iPace program that is offered by the American Center. We also work with the American Center and with the US Embassy managing the English language program in both the American Center and the Jefferson Center in Mandalay. And so World Learning as a core and its core values include building communities, building intercultural understanding, promoting social inclusion and justice, and sustainability. And these are core values. So I wanted to start by giving you a brief introduction to World Learning, which is the organization I represent, and then introduce you to today's session, which will look at online learning programs from a three layers perspective. And the layers that we will explore today include stakeholder and resources management. Whenever we have an online program, there are people involved, there are students, there might be parents involved, there are other organizations involved. The second layer we will explore has to do with curriculum development and instructional support. And the third one has to do with the instruction team, which includes teachers, mentors, facilitators, etc. So when we think about online program, many organizations think about the platform. They ask themselves, what are we going to use? Will it be Google Classrooms? Will it be Canvas? Will it be Moodle? What kind of applications will we use? Can we use Zoom, Skype? What are the options? But what I like to do today is to focus on online learning from the perspective that it is more complex than that. It includes a different variety of factors. It includes the teachers, it includes the organization, the administration, it includes the resources available. And these are the three layers that we want to explore. So before moving to the three layers, I wanted to share three basic premises that we have seen in our programming when it comes to online learning. And as I mentioned, World Learning offers a variety of programs, and many of them are also offered online, especially with the current health crisis, with the current pandemic around the world. We needed to pivot our programs to working online. And so when we work online, we might think this is totally different than working face-to-face. And it is true. Online learning is a completely different type of learning. It is a different focus of learning. But there are some basic premises that still remain the same. And these are the ones that I want to mention today. The first premise is that all efforts are to be focused on the benefit of the learner and learning, which means as an organization, when we or as individuals, as teachers, if we want to implement online learning, we need to keep in mind the fact that the ultimate goal is always to focus on the learner, on our students. They are the primary objective of learning. So it's not about having a fancy platform, not about having the best technology. It's about how to use what we have to really help our students learn. The second premise has to do with what are some of the overarching best practices transcending instructional modality. And there are best practices that we know as teachers. For example, instruction giving, we know that we can give instructions and ask for concept check questions. That's a best practice in face-to-face. We also know that a best practice in face-to-face English teaching is modeling instructions. That's also a best practice. And so we can always take these best practices and apply them to online learning as well. So that's a basic premise. The third premise that I wanted to bring here is that learning always takes place in a community of practice. In a community of practice and support are both the community of practice and support are essential for learning. Let me just really see a quick raise, like raising your hands or clicking the thumbs up button on your screen. How many of you learn better when you work with a group? Okay, I see a few thumbs up. Okay. How many of you and now the second question, and thumbs up again. How many of you as teachers feel that that learning in a community is much better than individually? Okay. Thank you. So yeah, this is one of the things we want to keep in mind, right? That learning is best done when it's done as a community. Okay. The fourth premise has to do with the fact that all stakeholders involved are going through the human experience. And this is something that I have seen during this time where a lot of organizations around the world, and we work with organizations all over the world. And many of these universities, schools, nonprofits turn their programs to online learning. But one of the things that they thought was, well, teachers are home, students are home, so they have more time to do more work. So many of these online programs became even more difficult for teachers because they had even more work to do. And students got even more work to do. And the overall effect has not been, in many cases, was not really positive because people still had their lives at home. Many teachers had families to take care of. They have children, they have people to take care of at home. They had responsibilities at home that they needed to take care of. So one thing that we want to keep in mind is the fact that because we are learning online and maybe we are working from home, it doesn't mean that life does not go on. It doesn't mean that we don't have the normal responsibilities. We do. So we want to keep that in mind. And at the same time, we want to keep it in mind the fact that students are also overwhelmed and they could have Zoom fatigue, for example. I know of students who have had to sit in front of the computer screen for 6 or 7 hours at a time. And that's just a lot. That's too much in many cases. And so we want to keep this in mind. Everyone is going through the human experience. Okay, so those are the 4 basic premises. Going forward. So one thing that I wanted to share also is the fact that looking at online learning, there have been different models that have been used for online learning. And one of them is having the first model is this one that you see here, which is called the individual faculty or subject matter expert. In many cases, there are schools or universities that implement online learning, but it is the initiative of one person, maybe one teacher or 2 teachers who are actually really knowledgeable in online and educational technology, and they are the ones who implement the program. And that's one model. A second model is that the IT department usually have the leadership in implementing online learning. And so many schools, and I've seen some schools that we work with, have gone into really massive level projects to acquire equipment, to acquire technology. And so it is the IT department that leads online learning. And that's also a model, but it's not the recommended model. A third model that we see is that sometimes there are places where online learning is implemented by the academic department. And by that, we mean a small group of people putting together a lot of guidelines, putting together a program for online learning that is used by the entire school. And the fourth model, which is the one that we recommend, is what we call the online learning unit, which means there is a unit that is exclusively dedicated to developing online learning programs. And the reason for this is that the online learning unit brings in different expertise. Okay. Just as a quick question, how many of you, and if you can say the thumbs up, how many of you have seen model number 1, individual teachers doing online learning, like as individual initiative? Okay. Okay, how many of you have seen in your school or university the academic department taking the leadership for online learning? Okay. And how many of you have seen an online learning unit, which is a unit, a group of people exclusively dedicated to developing online programs? Okay. We recommend that this is the better or the best of the 4 models, because it allows different people with different expertises to come in and to work exclusively on online learning. It's like when you have a school or a university, or if you work in a university, starting an online learning program, it's like starting a new department. And many organizations don't see it this way. They think, oh, well, the teachers are there. let them start it. and but it's not that easy. It's a different department. It's a different animal. It's a different set of rules. It's a different set of guidelines. And so this is one of the reasons why that we advocate for an online learning unit to be in place, so that it is taken in exclusively as a separate project that has the resources and the focus it needs to be successful. Okay. So with that in mind, and having seen this, and I take this from Vivolo. Vivolo is published a book this year, which, and I can share the bibliography afterwards, but which in which he puts forward these 4 models. Okay. Moving forward, so looking at the online learning and the way that it could be structured in what we call the pyramid of online learning support. Vivolo proposes the following pyramid. And notice how in this pyramid, the learner is at the top, because ultimately any effort that is done by any school or university needs to be focused on helping the learners learn. Okay, so the learner is always here at the top. The learner, in our view, has to be the central part of learning. Okay, not the technology, not the books, the learner. Okay, and so when we look at this pyramid, we looked at the fact that we have a really important base. First, we need to have the infrastructure, which means the school or the university needs to think in terms of what is the needed infrastructure to deliver online learning programs. And this is really important here. Okay, the infrastructure is something that a lot of universities don't necessarily think about, as a plan, as a set plan. Okay, so we have the infrastructure here, but that needs to be supported by human resources, by finance, etc. At the same time, we are looking at the at 2 important support pieces. One, an instructional designer, which means that whenever we have an online program, we need to have someone or a group of people developing curriculum. This is very important. Okay. One of the big challenges during this pandemic, and one of the big challenges for teachers, has been that many of teachers have been asked to develop their own curriculum, to develop their own programs. And that really, it puts a lot of stress on the teaching position. It puts a lot of stress on teachers, a lot of overworking, a lot of burnout. And of course, we don't want teachers burned out, right? We don't want to be burned out. Okay. As a teacher, in my career as a teacher, I have been burned out a few times, and it hasn't been fun, right? I've had to take time away and really recharge. So we need to have, if you are thinking about having an online learning program, we highly recommend having an instructional designer or a group of people who design curriculum. That's their only job. And working with the instructional designer, we also recommend having an instructional technologist. And this person is someone who knows about technology, someone who may know how to use Google Classrooms or Moodle or Canvas really well, and can bring in that technological expertise to the table, into the conversation. This is not the teacher's job. This should be the job of a separate group or a separate person, because they bring in that expertise. And so together, working with the instructional designer, they need to put together a program that teachers can use. It's a virtual class that you're building. It's a virtual program. It takes a lot of group members to get this done. But all of this has to do with, and like if we look at the support groups, which include IT, the organization, the designer, the technologist, all of this in support of the faculty, of the teachers. who are there to deliver a class. So ideally, teachers need to have their own very specialized role, which is delivering the class or teaching students and working with the students in their benefit. And this is what we call the online learning pyramid, which basically, in a nutshell, separates different functions. I have talked to many teachers around the world, and these teachers have become curriculum designers, technology experts, and teachers, and sometimes counselors. And so the teacher is wearing 4 or 10 hats at a time. And it's not really helpful for the teacher, and it's not really helpful for the learners. And so I would like today to encourage everyone to think about this process and also think about the fact that maybe in online learning, we need to segment, we need to segregate some of the functions that people do within the program. Okay. So moving forward then, there is what we call the online learning spectrum. And so another important piece of online learning programs is not only the structure, the pyramid that we just saw, but also the lifetime of a program, right? So, like just like a human being, right? We're born as babies, but we grow up, right? I mean, I'm not very tall, so I didn't grow up very much. So, but the idea is this, right? That we change and we grow up throughout our life. Today, I realized that I am growing old. It was really early in the morning for me, and I was like, oh no, I have to get up, right? Then one of my shoulder just cracked, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm getting old. So we change, right? And just like that, our language online learning programs change. And so if you notice here, what I actually have in this graphic is the lifetime or a suggested lifespan of online learning programs, which at the bottom you see what we call the grassroots activities. And by grassroots activities, we mean there are organizations or schools where online learning is taking place as like sort of activities that take place once in a while, here and there. And it's nothing organized yet. It might be something that is done as an event sometimes, or maybe part of the class is done online, but there's nothing really organized at the level of the whole organization. And so that's a starting point. Was one of the starting points. The second step is the second level there that you see is what we call the supported isolated initiatives, which means there might be teachers who are really interested in implementing online learning programs, and they talk to the principal or they talk to the dean or they talk to the supervisor, and they say, hey, I would like to do this program online. And the principal will say, awesome, excellent, go for it. And so some teachers do this. I have many colleagues, even before the pandemic, who were mixing their class. They had some elements online, so students had to go, let's say, on Moodle or Google Classroom or Canvas, and some elements that were face-to-face, but nothing as a whole organization. And that's okay. If you are there, that's great. It's a place to be. But the next step after that is what we would call the systemic approach. And by systemic approach, it means that an organization, could be a school or a university, makes the decision or decides to, at the grand level of the entire organization, something will be done to organize online learning, or programs will be done in a blended manner. And here in the United States, there are many universities, many universities that have opted for this option. They have gone this avenue, which they have a mix of online and face-to-face instruction. And they have done it as a system. It could be a system in a department, could be a faculty. It could be a system within, let's say, the economics department, the engineering department, but it is a system. And ultimately, if you are thinking about implementing online learning, what we would like to say is, if you are at the grassroots level or at the supported isolated initiatives level, work with your school and push your supervisors and push the organization to find ways to move into the systemic approach, because that's really going to be more beneficial for everyone in the long run, because in the long run, it'll provide what we call a sustainable program. Look, we cannot deny that online learning will increase. We study a lot of the statistics of how many people are learning online, and the curve is just impressive. As of 2005, there is an exponential growth in the upward curve of online learning. And so this is something that's going to happen, and it's happening already. And it's going to be even more popular and more requested by students. So we say, let's look at the possibility of becoming more systemic in the way we approach online learning to provide a sustainable program. What we have seen during the pandemic, the reaction of many schools during the pandemic is what we call the stopgap approach, which means, teachers, let's go online today. And teachers, whoa, we can't do this. It's a lot of work. And well, they did it, right? And many schools are saying we're online now. But what we're saying is that's only a stopgap approach. It's only to respond to an emergency. But let's think more of the long term. Let's think of a more sustainable approach, which will help the school develop these programs in the long run. Okay. So when it comes to the one of the layers, and this is one of the layers that we talked about, the 3-layer approach. This is a key layer, which has to do with managing stakeholders and resources. Okay. When we talk about stakeholders, we mean people who are involved in the education process. It involves students, parents, school administration, teachers, ministries, everyone involved in the process. Very briefly, how many stakeholders can you think about that are in your teaching? Just show me with your fingers how many. I can think of 4 stakeholders, which would be usually our funder. We work a lot with the US government, our funder. The other are our students or participants. We have teachers in our programs. Our other stakeholder is our partners in other countries in those programs. And my 4th stakeholder is my administration here in Washington, DC. So it's 4. How many can you think about in your own context, in your own teaching? How many stakeholders do you have? Just show your fingers. Okay, can I see some of those fingers up? Okay. I guess some people have like 10 stakeholders, okay? So those are the people involved, right? Those are the people involved in the learning process. And so when we look at this model here, which is this upward model of stakeholders, usually we think about how decisions are made in schools and universities. Sometimes decisions are made by the administration, right? And so I remember when I was a teacher working in an American center, very much like the American Center in Yangon. It was an American center. We would, every 3 or 4 years, we would change the book that we used in the program. We would change the series, right? So, there are many publishers out there like, Macmillan, Pearson, et cetera, Oxford, et cetera. So every 4 years, we would change the books that we would use. And quite often, the decision was made by the principal or by the director or by the group of the academic department to see what books were to be used. And that's okay. That's a good approach. But for online learning, and if you want to manage stakeholders, we support or we suggest the idea of a bottom-up process. You see there the bottom-up process? And the bottom-up process means that everybody is involved from the beginning. So what we need to do is the following. When we think about implementing an online learning program, we would need to first think, okay, what is going to be our approach? Are we going to just implement the program, or are we going to ask people involved for information? Are we going to have this layer here that you see here, which is the needs assessment layer, which means, are we going to ask teachers what really works for them? Let's say what kind of topics, what kind of material they need for online learning, what kind of support they need for online learning. Are we going to ask the teachers that? Are we going to ask students about the topics that they're interested in? Because I can tell you, I would need to ask my students what they are interested in, because I am an older person. And if I'm working with students who are 15 or 16-year-old, I don't know necessarily what they like. There's a very big generational gap. So I need to have needs assessment. I need to ask my students what are some of their interests, so that my curriculum or the curriculum that I develop really reflects those interests. And the third layer is what you see here, which is working committee and established roles and responsibilities. So involving everyone. If you're going to design an online learning program, and after knowing what the needs are and the interests are, then the next step is for a committee or a working group to be established to do this, that has time, that is given time, and that is giving resources. And finally, establishing standards and policies for online learning. Okay. And by standards and policies, we mean, what do we call a passing grade on online learning? How do we grade it? How do we, what are some standards that involve copyright material, right? And there's a lot of material available online. And we would think that the challenge oftentimes is that this material is available, but we also need to use, we need to know if we can use the material. If we have let's say the ability, if it's an open source material, for example, what are some standards regarding that? Because we also want to have a program that uses resources that are available, but that we are also allowed to use. And that's what we mean by that, managing the stakeholders, involving everyone in the process. And also asking parents, what are some of the challenges that you have at home learning online? And I'm just curious, what are some of the challenges that you face? And if you can type them in the chat, that would be great. What are some of the challenges that students face learning online? Okay. And I will move forward, and feel free to type in your answers, and so we can see and you can share some of those. Okay. The second layer that we want to discuss today is the layer that involves curriculum development and instructional support. And this is, we need key principles here. First of all, when we develop online curriculum and we support teachers to teach online, first of all, apples and pears, that's what we need to keep in mind. Apples and pears are different. I cannot compare an apple to a pear. And so I cannot compare online learning to face-to-face learning. There is a big movement to resist online learning by parents, by some students as well, even teachers, because they say that online learning and face-to-face learning are not the same thing. And they're right, they are not the same thing. So we need to keep this in mind first, that online learning and face-to-face learning, we are talking about apples and pears. They are a completely different um, a type of learning, a completely different type of programming. We also need to think in terms of when we develop curriculum, of how functional is the design going to be, considering the learner's context, considering what their interests are, what is available to them. There's also a need to have clear roles and standards, which means that there need to be specialized roles and approaches to learning, to online curriculum development. Who's going to be developing what? What are some of the roles that we have there? And also, at the same time, using a leveraging on the platform that you are using, which means there are specialized roles and and approaches. And if you use Google Classrooms or Moodle or Canvas, really have people and give people the time to explore what are some of the features of these platforms. What are some things that they can do in these platforms? So it's not a matter of the teacher having to do this, but having people who can explore what can be done with these platforms. We have World Learning uses Canvas, and Canvas has a function that is called Big Blue Button. And Big Blue Button works like Zoom, actually. It allows for teleconferencing. But we have a specialized group of people who took time to work with the platform and to develop knowledge about the platform so that they can inform teachers on how to best use it and provide teachers with that needed support. And finally, here are some elements of successful curricula that are online as well, not only online, but face-to-face. And notice that there are 3 elements that I like to highlight. If you're going to develop curriculum or curricula for online learning, first of all, there needs to be social presence, which means any good online learning program needs to bring students together. It needs to provide students the opportunity to interact online, to share opinions, to share ideas, to build a community of learners, which is something that we talked about at the beginning. It's not about doing a quiz online and then leaving. In many programs, students go in and they do a quiz and that's it. There is no interaction with their peers. But effective curriculum or curricula in online learning would need to have the social presence. The second element has to do with cognitive presence. And by cognitive presence, we mean that online learning tasks need to push students to think and to really get their cognitive processes working, meaning to think about the work that they are doing. It could be through some series of questions, asking for opinions, asking them to do tasks that will help them, that will ask them to apply what they learn, so that it's not just a click, click, click. You know, this is one thing about Facebook, and I know I have Facebook, and I suppose many of you have Facebook, right? And on Facebook, you look at the pictures that people post, which are some beautiful pictures, and all you have to do sometimes is just to like, right? Or love, or the other, the other reactions that there are available. So my interaction is very quick. I don't have to do a lot of thinking. It's just like, oh, that's a nice picture, click like, right? But when it comes time to actually online learning, we need to move forward with that. Interaction means that as a student, I look at a task and the task will make me think, will force me to think and to have my thinking processes on. It could be through maybe reading an article and then giving an opinion about the article online. And that's really a way to develop cognitive presence as well. And the third element, which is really important, is teaching presence. And which means in online instruction and the way that curriculum is developed, it needs to include elements where the teacher actually has the opportunity to provide feedback to students. This is very important. So providing feedback to students is one way. Another way of establishing teaching presence is by commenting on students' opinions, meaning if there is online, if there is a forum online, the teacher could go in and say, hey, that's a great idea. Can you explain a little more? Or, hey, that your opinion is really quite, well explained. It makes me think about this time when this happened to me. So actually, the teacher becoming engaged in the process in a way that this is a big challenge when we have online programs, for example, like self-paced programs or some MOOCs. And I guess many of you have been involved in this, that sometimes they tend to be more self-paced. So it's hard to feel the presence of the instructor. But this is very important for the instructor to be present online and to respond in real time. It's a challenge because we don't want to respond to students' comments a week later, right? So if we have a task or a question, it's better to be there and to respond to students' questions the sooner the better. Okay. So that's those are some of the elements that make the educational experience really important. The third, the next layer has to do with the instruction team for online learning, the team of teachers, the team of trainers. And we need to have, first of all, the instruction team has to focus also on designing training based on focus groups, tech and pedagogy, meaning the instruction team needs to know what are the capacities of the staff at the moment when it comes to technology and pedagogy. If you are also thinking about implementing online learning programs, you need to set up training opportunities. For example, if you're using a learning management system, having a sandbox where teachers can try out things before they even go online. Also having small experiences where your teachers, if you're at a coordinator or a trainer, you can work with a group of teachers and they can learn online, let's say one module, and they experience it as learners. So they can see it from the learner's perspective. We also encourage a scaffolding of learning for instructors or teachers, meaning don't expect teachers, or as teachers, don't expect to know everything at once. It's a gradual process, and it's okay if you don't know, right? I myself, I am learning a lot about online learning as I implement different programs, and it's okay. It's a whole process, and technology changes all the time. So it's going to be expected that this is going to be a process. And at the same time, we also want to keep in mind the fourth element, which is to allow customization. And by that, we mean that we need to customize our program to our students' needs and their interests. I love the fact that we have a lot of textbooks available for language learning, and there's a lot of material for online learning as well. But I also want to encourage everyone here, and I as a teacher as well, to customize our material. Let's say to ask students questions about their own context. Meaning if you're working, let's say, with a video or an article that talks about climate change, you can ask your students, hey, what are some ways that we can take on the climate change challenge here in Myanmar, in your community, in your city? So we also need to customize. And this is really important. And the final piece, which is here, which is self-care. And this is really one of the most crucial elements of online learning, and at least the instruction team, is to make sure that you take care of yourselves. A lot of teachers are working triple hours, triple the amount of hours a day now with online learning. but we also want to take time away and walk away from the computer. Kind of like detox yourself from the computer and make sure that you you have well-established schedules for your students, well-established times in which your students can consult, if they have any questions. It's not ideal for teachers to be answering students' questions at 10 p.m. at night or at 11. Or earlier on. This is time where maybe you can take time as a teacher to give yourself a break from your hard work. So that's really important, self-care. Okay, so I will take the remaining 6 minutes of this session. I will allow it for questions if you have any questions. So if you have a question, can you maybe raise your thumb up and the host could let you speak? Would that work? Sir. Okay. So if you have a question,
I will make them unmute.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So please feel free to ask a question. So thumbs up, and then the host can speak. Okay. 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 So any questions? I can't see everyone.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
Shall I read out to you?
Yes,
what's
please.
What's the best way to measure the student's assessment? That's the question.
Okay, that's a really good question, and it depends on the skill that you are working with, right? So what we have done in our online programs, and I'm speaking here basically of online programs, we have, for example, if we have a writing task, we make sure that we provide students with a rubric so they can assess their own writing. If it's a listening task, we might think of a short quiz, and some platforms like Moodle have the option where you can make a quick quiz and students answer the quiz, like the listening comprehension questions, and they get immediate feedback. If it's a speaking task, we can ask students to record themselves and upload it to the platform, and then they can do peer checkup using a rubric as well. And of course, you as the teacher could use the rubric to provide feedback as well. So the point here is that online, you have two options. You could take on all the work and end up with a pile of work on your desk, digital desk, or you could allow the students to do more self-assessment, which is what we really suggest, allowing students to do a lot more self-assessing, using rubrics, using quizzes that will give them immediate feedback. And that's a good way to assess online, which is different. Face-to-face, I could just go and listen to my students working in pairs, and if they're using the structure or vocabulary that I taught, I'm like, oh, good, they're learning, right? Online, you can't do that, right? So you need to find alternative ways. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. We were like a technology, a digital dinosaur at the start, but now we are learning. So you mentioned a lot of learning tools and platforms. So do you have any plan to offer free online training courses for the teachers in Myanmar? Or the American Center, are they offering any courses?
That is a really great question, and thank you for asking. At the American Center, we are currently offering our English language program online, given the pandemic. But we are also planning to offer some teacher training sessions online. So you will be hearing about this pretty soon. We want to serve the teacher community as well. And so we will offer some of these online for free, of course. So you will hear about them.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hi, hi again. Hello, can I ask?
Hello, yeah. Sure, yeah, go
thank
ahead.
you. I have two questions. One question is about the authenticity of the students' homework, their assignments, and their answers for the exams. Another question is the test really important? So I have joined some online courses, and then I found out that they gave certificates of achievement, even though we don't really took the test. We didn't really took the test. So what's your opinion upon that? So what's the difference and which one is better? Thank you.
Okay. So that's a good question. So first of all, I'll address the first question, which is how to assess the authenticity of work. I think that one of the tricky parts about online learning is that as a student, I can go copy paste somebody else's work and submit that work. So one of the elements about online learning is for us as teachers to work with students to develop a culture of authenticity. And by that, we mean developing a culture for students to know that it's not okay, it wouldn't be okay to take somebody else's work and copy paste it. And if you do, you need to credit the person, which is also an academic skill, right? I mean, if you write a paper in the university, you need to properly cite or the source, right? And so I think it's first a matter of building the culture. Second, it's a matter of building tasks that will require students to prove competencies. So this is going to the question about the test. I am not a big fan of a test because I think a test really is one event at one moment in time. It's a picture, right? But I'm a bigger fan of having students do tasks that will help them that will force them to prove the competency in certain things. And those tasks could be developed for the students to prove, for example, that they can make a phone call in English, or that they can write an email to a customer in English, for example. These tasks really prove their competency. And when it comes to grading, instead of saying you need to pass a final test, I would recommend to have a series of tasks and give students the opportunity to choose the tasks they want, but they need to complete at least 80, 75 or 80% of those tasks. And that would be a passing grade. I don't agree with the idea of having students not do anything and they get the certificate. That's really not helping them. But I am more of the idea of saying, look, you have 10 tasks, you need to do 8 of those 10. So you choose which ones. So there's choice in there, but there's also a minimum requirement percentage for them to actually earn the certificate.
Thank
Okay?
you very
I don't know
much.
if that answers your question, but that's a possibility.
That is very useful. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay. Someone else?
Yes, sir. There's another question in the chat box.
Yes.
Also, me, I want to know, yeah, how can we manage a large class from online, sir?
Okay. And by large class, how many students do we mean? Do we mean 50 or because a large class might be in some cases 30 to 50 or even more. My suggestion is this. For a larger class, I would recommend more asynchronous work. So like, you know, the conference that we're having right now, this is great. But if you have online classes all the time like this, it's going to be difficult to manage the work of the students, right? Then there isn't a lot of opportunity for interaction. So I would recommend a lot of asynchronous work, meaning if you have a large class, have the students do some tasks that might be online, like on Google Classrooms or Moodle, for example. Have them do those tasks and then come together and work in smaller groups. So you might have 2 sessions that work with 20 students at a time, for example. So even like you don't need to be face-to-face with them or computer screen to computer screen, but you could break that into smaller groups where you have actually closer and more personal contact with them online. But a lot of the work is also done asynchronously. Okay, that's one way. Okay, are there any more questions? All right. Okay. I think that's pretty much we're actually over time.
We have another closing
Sure.
ceremony, sir. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure being here with you, and congratulations on such a great event.
Thank you so much.
We really appreciate your presentation, sir. Very thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yes, sir.
Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.